Thank you to whoever was kind enough to ring the glass. I appreciate that. It's just so good to see this big group gathered here today. I hope for more than just food, but also for the topic, which is both controversial right at the beginning, interesting, and many more things. Hi, I'm Akanksha. I head the nature and biodiversity work at the World Economic Forum, and it is my pleasure to be hosting this session here today. Along with Intent, so thank you so much for the generosity, but also with the UK France International Advisory Panel for Biodiversity Credits. I just want to do quick 3 to 4 minutes of memory refresh and context setting. 2 years ago, actually, right at Hotel Derby, some of us, just I think it was less than 15 people, came together to explore what are certain innovative financing mechanisms that can be put forward to bridge the huge financing gap for global biodiversity framework and biodiversity outcomes. I'm really delighted. I do have a few co-conspirators already here. I see Simon here, I see Tim Coles here, and many more. We've come a long way since then, with a lot longer way to go. Throughout this session today, I would encourage all of you to look at what can we do concretely to make this market a reality. What would it take for businesses and buyers to go beyond bilateral trade and what they can do in their own supply chains anyways, but actually help build a market that has high integrity at the very core. It has transparency and traceability to ensure there is credibility both on the buyer and the seller side. And most importantly, not forget that the end goal is not just to generate money, the end goal is actually to ensure positive outcomes for people and the planet. With that, it's my huge honor and pleasure to invite Sylvie Goulart, who's the co-chair of the International Advisory Panel for Biodiversity Credits. A huge applause, please.
The huge applause is for Akanksha, because you organized all this, and thank you for being here. I'm going to speak on behalf of my co-chair and myself. Dame Amelia Fawcett is very sorry not to be here with us. Maybe that's the reason why you only put a frog on the screen. So it's a UK-French initiative, but once again, without many people in this room, it would not exist, and without all of you for the future work to do, it would not be a success. So thank you for being here. There is no such thing as a free lunch, so you're going to be obliged to listen to me. But I hope I can give you some elements of what we try to do. And I thank really very much the members of the panel who are here, Simon Zadek, David Craig, Akanksha, and many others I forgot, and they will kill me at the end. So the nice thing with the World Economic Forum is that it does not only give us the opportunity to meet here in the snow with boots, but it is also the work you do on substance and the contribution you have been making for years to introduce all these topics or to put them at the top of the agenda, even if many companies are perfectly aware of the risks and the opportunities linked with nature. So I don't need to repeat, because if you are here today, you're already aware that nature is rapidly deteriorating. But I would like to insist, because sometimes we put the blame on some people who are so-called populists or ignore what science is saying. We all ignore a little bit what the scientists are saying, and I include myself in these people. So we should really be aware of what is happening. It is documented, es ist dokumentiert, as we could say here in a German-speaking area. So I'm not going to develop on everything, but I was glad last year to see that in your risk report, biodiversity loss was mentioned, and that this year again, under the umbrella of extreme weather, the idea of nature biodiversity was there. It is real, and it could become irreversible if we don't work hard. Second thing, the good news of the end of 2022 is that there is at least an agreement at a political level. We could have wished more detailed, with more enforcement, with whatever, but countries are committed, and we can consider that we have targets, and these targets are clear, and we take them seriously. And in the Montreal Kunming target framework, there are some important points. I will only mention two. Sorry for the rest, but I try to prioritize. The one is the role played by indigenous people and local communities. It is important. And when I say that, I would like to build a bridge with, it's not, we have to have the North and the South. We all have local communities. We'll all have citizens, farmers, workers, people we need to take on board. In the South, with certain traditions, etc. But when I discuss with farmers in my country or elsewhere, they also say we had the knowledge. We were more or less forced to use new method, but we had this knowledge. So we need to be sure that we insist of what we have in common. The same thing I discussed with Esther before is that I'm not sure that we can impose anything on our children. And here I talk as a mother. So we should say, well, the tradition is nice, but we should also be forward-looking. And I remember when I discussed with some members of the panel, Jennifer from the Philippines, Pauline from Uganda, as mothers, they also consider that sometimes it's difficult to preach the own children. So this continuity, this role for local communities, the idea that there are traditions we have to transmit, but not the illusions that our children are going to do everything we consider right. So we are not there to patronize them. We are there to organize a world in which sustainability is at the heart. So very briefly on the panel. We are very young. We were launched in June at the summit President Macron organized in France to make sure that no one country on earth is obliged to choose between fighting against poverty, development, and climate and sustainability. So it was a good initiative, French and British, with a strong input from both countries, but independent from the governments and meant to be global and to build a bridge with all continents. We are very, very grateful, and many of you are maybe there and or know the people who are involved in our working groups. Beyond the panel itself, 20, 25 people for the whole world, it's not a lot. We have people on board in our working groups, and we really welcome, and I insist in front of you, we welcome inputs for others. We don't consider that we know, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If Dame Amelia Fawcett was there, she would say exactly the same. We know the work that is done is many network, in many groups of people, in many regions. And I see Simon, for once, agreeing with me. and what we would like to do is really to gather your contributions. So feel free to, first of all, answer our call for views. We did one that was closed on Friday, but we will do two more in the spring and in the summer before we manage to, I hope, launch a coalition at the COP16 in Colombia. Because our goal is not only to put in place a framework or to put on a piece of paper what should be done, but it is sure that we have a coalition of motivated people saying, well, under this coalition, we are ready to do pilot things. And I insist on that. We don't know what the truth is. We don't pretend. If we manage to have goodwill and a certain number of people from north, south, finance, corporates, indigenous people, and science, saying together we can have a try to do a pilot project, to do some sandboxing, we will be happy. We want to be operational, to survive, but to be concrete and tangible. So once again, I call for contribution, views, etc. Our secretariat is small. We don't have so many means, but I'm sure that with the help of your own teams, we will achieve more. So the time horizon is, I don't know, Mariana must be here from Colombia, from Terrazos. We will be very, very happy to meet at the COP in your country. We know it's a responsibility for the country, but it is also fantastic for us to to know that we will go to Colombia in October. It will not be the end of the journey. If there are Brazilian people in the room, people from South Africa, we know that the next G20 are in your hands. And once again, if we survive, we will be very happy to see how it happens. No, but you know, it's not only a joke, because we are in the long term. No, it's a long-term journey. So we are determined, and we feel responsible for what we are doing. But I consider that the best thing would be that we can also create the momentum and that others take over at the right time. So I conclude. Thank you, Akanshka, for the invitation, for the report, for the work you do, for the work the WEF is doing, for the quality of the work. Because I insist, as you said, what we would like to do is, even at a modest scale, but to do something that makes sense, that is credible, that can show integrity, that shows that we take seriously the people on the ground developing the projects, and that, of course, if possible, is also good for the company based elsewhere. And I don't resist, as Tony Golder is here and David Craig, without the work done by TNFD, we would not be where we are. So we thank you all, and we wish you the best, because when I see that more than 320 companies accept to disclose with your TNFD framework, we know that the awareness is going to increase. I cannot mention all the projects having a great success, but this one is dear to my heart, as I was a little bit at the beginning. So well done, and we will try to do, if possible, as well as you did on TNFD. Thank you so much, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Sylvie. I do want to just pick up on one thing you said, which is the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report. I think that's one which this community and everyone watches out for very religiously at the start of every year. And it's quite telling that in the short term, which is the next 2 years, the risks identified only include extreme weather events, as in the top 10. But in the next 10 years, which is a long term, the top 5 risks are all environmental. Sadly, that shows sometimes how myopic we can be, because the decisions we take today will determine the future that we will have in 10 years' time. So just putting that note out there for the urgency, let's look for practical, pragmatic, equitable solutions here today if we want to achieve any one of our 2030 goals. With that, it's my huge pleasure and honor to invite next segment of panelists on stage. If I could request for the next slide change, that would be wonderful. I'm really delighted to have Sanjayan, who's the CEO of Conservation International. Please do come on stage, who'll be moderating the next segment for us. Big applause. David Vio, member of the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits, and doing significant thinking on how do we also look at metrics measurement to take these pieces forward. We're still waiting for the minister. Rebecca Braswell, CEO of Land Life Company, actually doing projects on the ground, trying to make sense of how do we connect the markets with objectives of restoration. We also have Esther, who's the chair of the Community Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits Alliance. Just a bit of context for everybody. The BCA folks spent the Monday and Tuesday of this week going really deep into the weeds to figure out what the next 2 years of plan would look like to make sure we are ready to put the credits on the market in a credible way. So Esther, please come on stage. Thank you. And absolutely not the least person, the one who gave us all the dream, is Elizabeth Marema, who's the co-chair for the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And again, just giving context here, TNFD made a huge announcement yesterday. More than 300 companies agreed to assess and disclose their nature-related risks, both impacts and dependencies. If that does not give a driver for nature loss, I don't know what will. So with that, here's to kicking off the panel.
Thank you, Akanksha. Thank you so much. And, huge credit to Akanksha and the team at the WEF for pulling this together. It's been really impressive to see the progress that we've been made. We're still in the talking stage, but now we're starting to experiment as well. So there's not just conversations that are happening, but there's actual real momentum. I went to breakfast this morning that was exactly on this topic. So let me say a couple of words to frame, and then we'll try and have a little bit of a discussion, and then we'll kick it back to all of you in the audience. So what can we agree upon? The WEF report makes it pretty clear we've got a gigantic gap in financing. And this sector is a sector we, many of the folks in this room and some colleagues outside this room, can actually make happen, right? The only other two avenues for financing would be government, and you know what government coffers look like today, and very, very challenging across the world, or it's philanthropy, and we've given our best shot in philanthropy. So this new asset class, if you will, this is really within our hands. If we make it happen, it exists. And it could have enormous dividends on the top side. I think there's general agreement that this is something that is generally good that needs to happen. I think there's general agreement that we can leapfrog what we have learned from the carbon markets. Some things have worked, some things haven't. Technology has dramatically changed in the time that the carbon markets have had to develop. And we can use that to make it much more transparent, much more accessible, using blockchain technology, for example, to really traceability, satellite mapping. We can learn a lot from the carbon markets in terms of building this. So we don't have to make all the same mistakes. In fact, we can leapfrog and go further, quicker. And then I think there's strong consensus that the principles on high integrity in the marketplace that the WEF has sort of outlined, there's general agreement on those principles. We think it should be high integrity. And we've at least been able to define it a priori, unlike with the carbon markets where we tried to scramble to catch up afterwards, right? There's also general consensus and agreement that indigenous peoples, local communities, not just are partners in this, but have a seat at the table at the planning stage, at the benefit stage, at the implementation stage. They now have possession of something the world finally is recognizing as crucial. And they need to be there alongside us every step of the way. There might be other things we have consensus on, but I'll end with this in terms of an uber consensus. So if I was to go around the room, I actually did this with a bunch of corporate CEOs. It was very interesting to get their take. And I asked you, what would you invest in? Where, your own money, your own 401k plans, retirement plans, those sorts of things. Your own money, what would you invest in where you felt comfortable with the return? In the next few years, I think you would look at the market and you could make some predictions, some intelligent predictions. Invest in India, there's growth there, you can see that. 5, 10 years, Google, sure. 10, 15 years, AI, yeah, I'm sure. Now let's go 50 years. What would you invest in today that would be around in 50 years? How about 100? So that's your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren, right? Inherited wealth. When you get down into the 50 to 100-year range, it's vanishing in terms of what you are certain is going to be there to produce a return. There are very few things that are truisms in investment. In fact, there's probably nothing except one thing. Nature will be more valuable tomorrow than it is today. What we don't know is what the curve looks like. But if we know that as a truism, surely we can build a business, an investable product around it. Now, there are some things we don't still have consensus on, and it's important that we don't gloss over them. Measurements. There's probably 30 different methodologies for how we measure biodiversity with increasing precision. There's no agreement on that. Maybe we don't need that. But even if we don't need that, we need acknowledgement that we don't need precision or we don't need consensus on measurement. Tradability. We don't really have consensus on that. Demand. We think there's a demand. Reports say there's a demand. We don't really know if there's a demand. And with that, a subset of that would be, of course, offsets. tricky, challenging word to use when you talk about nature. So there's still a huge divide for us to overcome in order to really create actionable momentum. But I really want to point out that there's many, many things that we can agree upon already. And that gives me a lot of hope for where we are today. So with that, I'm going to turn to, I'm going to start with you, Rebecca. So you're on the developer side of the business. 2023 was when Biodiversity Credits and this market sort of exploded on stage, right? Hopefully it'll have longer lasting power than other things that come out. From a developer's perspective, on the ground, what are the key trends that you are observing? And if you could keep your answer to sort of 3 minutes or so, I'll have a chance to go to all the panelists. Thank you.
Perfect. I'll be brief then. I think one we're already implementing, which is the use of technology. So when we go onto the ground, we have a very narrow planting window facing extremely harsh planting conditions because we plant on degraded land. So we have to put it goes in the ground, it has to be right. It has to be as close to right as we can get. So we use AI learning to help us run simulations on different planting species, on densities, so that we can put the best possible opportunity down in there to support biodiversity. And then we're baselining everything. We're not waiting for the key metric to emerge. We're using eDNA to understand what's in the soil so that we can look and track the uplift and make sure that it's trending in the right direction. I think the second two things are really aspirational. One is we really need to take a landscape level approach to biodiversity. If you're restoring 100 hectares, what you choose to do on 100 hectares could be vastly different than if you're looking at 10,000 hectares. And it sounds easier said than done, but the reality is we're going to run up against fences. We're going to run up against competing land use issues. We're going to run up against historical injustices of how land is managed. And I think all of our time and attention is going to need to be addressed on those issues because those are people issues, and that's what stops progress. The technology, let's just get it done. It's there. Let's fund it. You can implement it. And the third is, to your point about learning from the carbon markets, as we develop the financing mechanisms for biodiversity, without being rude, it needs to not be about the needs of the people destroying biodiversity. It needs to be about the needs of the landscape. Nature has to come first. I think sometimes I turn to my children when I can't make sense of things. And it's like, my daughter messes up her room. She comes downstairs. Hey, Mom, here's €1. Go clean up my room. That's not how it works, Stella. And so we need to think about that. We need to be
He's giving you the money?
No, but I'm saying that would be the equivalent. Like, I've made a mess, but here's €1. Go clean it up, right? That's not how we're going to fix the damage that's been done in our value chains. And I'm worried about biodiversity being that here's €1. Go clean it up, right? What happens in the value chains needs to be regulated. It needs to be required. You don't get a credit for cleaning up the mess that happens in a value chain. And then you need to understand that, thirdly, you are drawing from a broader system that you cannot see or touch or define all the time, but you know that you're drawing down from ecosystem services. So to continue the analogy of my daughter, pay your rent, right? You live in this house, you're using all of its facilities without really understanding exactly what it means. So pay your rent. Clean up your room, pay your rent. That's what I'd like to leave you all with.
Thank you, Rebecca. So let's stay with the theme on people. Esther, you come from Limpopo. You're right on the border of one of the great national parks of the world. You are there representing local communities and indigenous peoples. You've seen markets come and go. You've seen how little benefit has ultimately accrued to the people who are now stewarding something that the rest of the world very belatedly is waking up to. What do we need to do to ensure that this market, too, doesn't do what history has done?
Thank you very much. I think every time when I think of what is currently happening with the market, it always takes me back to the experiences I read around the gold rush, because I was not there then. And I just see these experiences repeating themselves from gold rush to carbon credits. Now we are busy with the biodiversity credit sector. But then, from the community perspective, I think our experiences, especially from one of the biggest national parks in the world, some know that area, which is a corner of Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Mozambique. We do have some community pilots in conservation that went very wrong, but mainly because the governance. And governance, people like to always talk about it when they write their thesis, when they write their papers. But do we really understand what governance around biodiversity needs to be adopted as a framework? I'm not sure if we are aware, because there are different approaches to governance depending on the regions. If you go to Africa regions, you find that there are traditional governance processes, legalized, documented, and in other regions it's just traditional and ancestral traditional processes that investors need to sit down and follow when it comes to engaging communities for them to be able to work with them. But also the issue of benefit sharing. Every time when we put that term before all of us, as experts in biodiversity, we realize as communities that it's always about communities who will wait when the deal is done, when the deal is about to be implemented, and they will be expected to come and get something from the entire deal. I think this time we have to learn from what has been happening from the carbon credit markets, that communities have to be respected from day one as partners, like BCA has already done. We are there. We are sharing some individual experiences from different regions, and we believe we will learn together. She was talking about her experiences as a developer. Very interesting. We are posing this question to all of us to say that, do we really see some of the communities being developers as we put together the market? Surely it can be done. But it needs a lot of capacity building. It needs some kind of commitment in terms of empowerment. I think as communities, we are expecting this market to be put together differently than experiences that have been repeating themselves in terms of benefit sharing, in terms of governance. How do we negotiate those contracts? I have had a number of examples from your Latin America, Africa. There are a lot of them, where you see that land is owned, or its communities are custodian of the land. But when developers, when investors go and negotiate, all of a sudden they negotiate with government, and government sign a contract. Now it's time for the investor to implement. It becomes so difficult because they don't have even rights over the land. So that is my contribution. Thank you.
So it's a great point. So it's not just having the access with the developers or the companies, the investors, but also with the sovereign governments. I'm going to stay this. I'm going to give the minister sort of the last word. So Elizabeth, let's go to you. Congratulations on the huge victory on TNFD. What lessons can we take from what you have observed in terms of the business community that we can bring to bear for this emerging market? And again, I would ask you to keep it to about 3 minutes so I can get around the panel. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. I think the whole question of biodiversity, of biocredits, we need to look at in different angles. There's the market angle, there's the government, the regulator angle, and the indigenous peoples and local communities angle. And at some point, as Esther pointed, the three need to communicate. And I think she had the right point that negotiations take place at a high level, but action implementation is on the ground level, where you have the local communities who are only 5% of the world, but safeguarding 80% of biodiversity, getting only 1% of ODA, but they have the land, they have that ecosystem. So I think that's a major lesson for biodiversity credits. It's a good emerging market, but also the business to be able, first is an emerging market, but it's also a resource mobilization mechanism from the credits. But also for the market and the business to be able to benefit from it, the market will need to have appropriate safeguards. We'll need to have the way to measure and verify. So those safeguards then become key for the business to have an impact on those credits. And for the business to do that, they will need the government to put the appropriate regulations and incentives, tax incentives, for instance, also in place. Otherwise, then the market cannot operate. And as the result, and particularly when it goes to the situation of indigenous peoples, local communities, that's why we get all these different interpretation of biodiversity credits. Yes, on one side, we look at it positively as a resource mechanism, but on the other side, until when those benefits are seen, you have the disincentive or negative aspect of it. And I'm sure this is what Esther was underlining. Until when the local communities really see they have the access and benefit from those resources which accrue the credit, then the buying in will come in. And access and benefit sharing does not come at the end. To be on the negotiation table, to be at the planning stage, so that then they can participate in its implementation, so that then they can support the market on its operation. So again, each aspect has its role, which is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm going to keep diving into the business and go right to the sort of front of the line in terms of the business. So, David, you're on the advisory panel for the advisory panel on biodiversity credits, but you also with BNP, and so you have this very unique perspective. Are investors ready? Is there a market? Are they willing to step into this right now, or in the near future?
I think to a certain extent, we need to look back at what we're trying to achieve. And I think there are two important principles around what these credits or units or whatever we call them may be. And we don't know what the maybe is first of all, they are only one of the tools that we can use on the financial side to help protect and restore nature. And that's super important. Because there are already markets that exist, gigantic markets. We know them, they're financial markets. So one of the important steps is that we gradually implement and include biodiversity metrics in investment decisions on markets that already exist, okay? That's actually quite important, and that's in the making. And we're talking about already gigantic stock and bond markets. They already exist, and they can be used to better protect biodiversity, as we did for GHG emissions. The second item is what these credits or units or certificates should not be. And I'm going back, I think, I love your metaphor. I'm going to start thinking about my kids. I think they did ring a bell on a few people. They should not be a way for corporates and institutions or whatever to actually stop or halt their actions to protect and restore nature. We all know that economic activity has an impact on nature. It would be very hypocritical to deny it. But we think that it's very important that these credits are not used to belittle those actions, but actually to be a complement to these actions. I think that's quite important. Now, what business and finance can do. Are people ready? I think there are quite a few people who are really interested in helping. And what we need to create is a space where that dialogue can happen. And I'm sure that Sylvie will remember the word sandboxing that I keep on banging on, which you took over, which I really like. And it's very important because we need to acknowledge that, first of all, there are many things we don't know, and that for a number of months, and most likely years, we'll be in an experimental phase. And that's extremely important. Why is that important? First of all, it's honest, which is important. It's intellectually honest that we will be experimenting, we'll be making mistakes, and everyone that goes from developers, that'll go from the financial sector, corporates, IPLCs, will be making collective mistakes. And we need to be very open about it. And that means that what we needed to provide a bit of a safe space where these experiments can happen, otherwise they will not happen. And that's what I mean by the concept of sandboxing. And I think we collectively can probably provide that. Then on that basis, I think there is interest from corporates, and that's very important because the corporates are, at the end, probably the end buyers of these instruments. Financial is simply a conduit or helping element. Then, and that to me is quite critical. And I think on that basis, quite a few people are sincerely willing to engage without necessarily knowing the end result, because we don't know the end result, and that's why this experiment is important. Second, I think we need to be ready to move away from certain concepts that we've applied in the past. You know, the concept of a global market for biodiversity credits, maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not relevant. There are also local systems that can be put in place. There are OTC things that can be put in place. Again, let's not be, constraints by concepts. I'm an economist by trade, so I can say that are created by economists for economist reasons, right? We need to be able to actually start from how you industrially create things. And you industrially create things by experimenting, by having a strong feedback loop. So I hope I stayed with my 3 minutes.
I completely agree on that latter point, and specifically, if we don't create almost a formal or an agreed-upon mechanism for sandboxing, for allowing corporations, nonprofits, governments, indigenous communities to experiment, and without blame, really share those results, I think we'll all be stuck in conversation. So thank you for that intervention. I'm going to finally go to the Minister, Minister Maru. Thank you so much for being here. I know there are lots of challenges right now in Papua New Guinea, so we very much appreciate you being here. You are representing a country, so there's a jurisdictional scale. At the end of the day, all of this happens in place, and government plays an enormous role in this. Your Minister of Finance was speaking with me a few months ago in our office in DC, and one of the things he mentioned is, we were talking about biodiversity, debt for nature swaps, and one of the challenges he mentioned was the capacity within countries to be able to work through the challenges of accessing financial markets, accessing biodiversity credits, accessing carbon markets, etc. Just the pure capacity. Like, how do we get there? How do we access that? We hear about it, but what can we do? I would love if you could say a few words on both the opportunities you see. You're in a mega biodiverse country, right? Rich in carbon, rich in biodiversity, rich in culture and indigenous communities. What's the opportunities for this sort of marketplace in Papua New Guinea? But also, what are the challenges that you think we ought to take into consideration? Thank you. Let me give you mine.
Thank you very much.
It's on.
It's on.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to this esteemed audience. I want to start by saying this. Our nation has been hearing about carbon credits for the last 15 to 20 years, and we've never benefited from any of it. We are now changing the word to biodiversity credit. We have the world's third largest rainforest, 7% of the world's biodiversity. Our people, 80% of our people live in the villages and depend on their forest for gardening, for business like planting cocoa and coffee. The question is whether we should continue to be the lungs of the world, or we must use the forest and extract value from the forest by turning it into plantations, by deforesting. Because we need roads, we need schools, we need far better health outcomes. And we've been hearing about the industrialized world talking about carbon credit, biodiversity credit, but none of our people have who want to preserve the forest for the sake of the world have seen any of the benefits. That is really our challenge. We are here to look for partners, look for countries, corporates who are willing to come to Papua New Guinea and partner our government and our people to start coming up with pilot projects to preserve forest. We need to know the mechanism to access biodiversity credit. For now, it's only a buzzword for us. We have the forest, our people are ready, and we are looking for partners. We know we have to do a lot more to stop exploitation of our forest, but if we have a choice, we are struggling for development. We are a developing nation. And I came to this esteemed conference with the hope that we can find partners, investors who can start the journey with us. It's time to stop talking about the buzzwords and start looking at creating value for our local people, our indigenous populations, so we can really contribute to assisting the world in preserving forests and making sure we continue to have lungs that will cater for the world. We also have a region where the Pacific is really adversely affected by climate change. Our islands are sinking. We already have climate change refugees. We've been talking about how to help these small island nations, but no money is coming and no one is stepping forward to help them. We don't even talk about sea walls. No one is coming forward to help us in the region. And really, for me, the message is loud and clear. We have the forest resources. Our people are willing to step up. Our government is ready, and we are looking for partners. Let's stop the talk and get down to some real action. Our people are ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Terrific, terrific, almost fire-starter-like comments that'll give the tables a lot of fodder for discussion, and I couldn't agree with everything that's been said on the panel. You know, I'd love to take a couple of questions or very short comments. It's an amazing audience here. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, again, if it's short, would love to entertain that. Sure. I'll go back there, sir, to you. Right, and you need a mic. Good. Let's send one down. Yeah. Oh, he's got one.
Hello. A huge honor to be in the room with you today. Thank you so much for the presentation. Question.
And sorry, your name, sir? And
I'm David Evan. I'm the founder of Primal Souls. So question here. We talk about credits, which is very top-down. From a bottom-up approach, what can we do as consumers and as business owners, startups, for instance? What is what we can do tomorrow already? That's my question.
Great. Great question. Does someone want to take that? I mean, yeah, you're on that side of the business in some ways.
I mean, I love the question because it's about what can I start doing now? And one of the key messages that we're trying to convey is don't wait for biodiversity credits to start doing things. Don't wait for the perfect data because it probably will never exist. Don't wait for perfection. So there are a number of things that can be done. First of all, there are actually a number of brands, and I'm not going to name names, that actually take certain commitments on biodiversity along their value chain. It's true in the food sector. It's true in a number of sectors. So, I mean, just need to turn around. Huh? It's quite simple. And we've done it for GHG. You can do it for social actions and so on and so forth. So as a consumer, there are quite a few things that you can do. I think we're all aware that I'm stepping my area of expertise is diets are important to protect biodiversity, very important. I mean, clearly the change of diets, and in two ways. First of all, what we eat and how we consume. About 30% of all food that's produced globally is wasted. And it's true in emerging markets, and it's true in the advanced countries. They're just wasted at different points of the value chain, right? So that's something that we can tackle with the help of that industry. And then I don't know which business you're in, so it's very, very, very difficult for me to say. But I think it's actually, I did the exercise as a teacher, is you actually sit down with your COO. sit down your COO and say, what are your 4 major pressure points on nature? And it's usually not very complicated. It's land use. How much land do you use? Do you convert? It's water use. It's pollutants. And then there are a few others that are pertaining to your industry. Just do that, and you can probably deal with, I don't know, whether it's 40%, 60%, 70% of the problem, but you're actually probably there.
David, I just would also mention, there are also a couple of products already out there in a sandbox sort of way. So at Climate Week, the little country of Niue issued what they call ocean conservation certificates. So $148, you can go online, you can buy a certificate from the country, backed by New Zealand, 1 square kilometer of coral reefs that are protected for at least 20 years. So this morning we went to breakfast that African Parks hosted on sort of a voluntary nature unit that they could create. So there are some experiments happening already, and you could participate as a way of learning. Take one more, and then I'll, sorry, someone down, okay, yes sir.
Is it me? I have the mic. Okay. So yeah, my name is Eli. My name is Eli. I represent UBS. My question is simply on biodiversity monetization. Do you really see that if there is a potential to monetize biodiversity, and if the companies that are involved in this could report this potentially in the future, just to be able to see what is the impact of a company in a certain area or geographical location, irrespective where you are from?
Yeah, Elizabeth, why don't you? And can I keep these answers short, because I'll take 2
Yes.
questions, then I'm going to turn it back to the table.
Just a word from the TNFD context, nature-related financial disclosure. Much as we had not yet developed guidance on carbon credits, but now we have the recommendations. And as the guidance are being developed, and as indicated, we should not wait to have everything on the table before we take action. We hope, as companies now begin to report and disclose using the recommendations, be it TCFD, be it TNFD, that's where they can begin also reporting on biodiversity credits.
Fantastic. Yes, ma'am.
I have it here.
Thanks. My name is Aditi Thorat. I'm with the Global Commons Alliance. So last year, 177 environmental defenders were killed across the world. And from 2012 to 2022, nearly 2,000. This is credible research available. How do we ensure that we protect environmental defenders? Sanjayan, you spoke about keeping communities at the heart of biodiversity credits. But when 1 every other day is actually being killed, according to last year's data, how do we ensure that at a fundamental level this is prevented?
Okay. Yeah, why don't you do like?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I understand that stats, and I know what you are presenting to us. Maybe the question also is to ask ourselves why the number keeps on increasing. Most of the protected areas are under the custodian of communities, and that's where these environmental defenders are. And the approach that the world has adopted in certain regions is wrong, because decisions are taken somewhere to say this is the best way of protecting this biodiversity without even discussing and having that kind of consensus with communities. And in some cases, for example, in Kruger National Park, you find that they're being killed because communities are trying to poach inside some of those parks. They want just to put bread on the table. And maybe the government has bought into the approach to say, let's protect these animals the way we want to protect. But in certain areas, it's about accessing the medicinal products, which are still very important from the ancestral knowledge of the IPLCs. So you find that there are a number of issues that are causing that, but all of them in one basket, that we are not really serious about negotiating with communities in terms of how do we run this biodiversity and protected areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, the last question.
Eckhard Hirschhaus, a medical doctor, founder of Healthy Planet, Healthy People. I just want to share 3 ideas with this incredible round, how to open the conversation that's necessary. One is the pandemia, how much trillions were lost due to COVID. And there's very little talk about the close linkage of the next pandemic with biodiversity loss. So if you want to talk to people with a lot of money, remember them, only 1% of all the money lost in the last pandemic is needed to prevent the next. Second, if climate change is the fever of Mother Nature, biodiversity loss is Mother Nature's dementia. Talk about all the technology, all the wisdom, all the knowledge that's inherited in every species there is. We're burning the book of life before we've read it. So the medical issue always opens up the mind to a different approach. And third, this is only for Germans. I'm looking forward to the translation. Reichtum ohne Artenreichtum ist Armut. So in Germany, Artenreichtum, biodiversity, which is always difficult to grasp, is the same word like wealth. So biodiversity, without your wealth, without biodiversity is worth nothing. So use it and get more people involved. Thank you. And planetary health diet is the solution to connect with the Eat Lancet Commission with Johan Rockström.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. I heard this morning that there was no German word for counterfactual, which I found really quite surprising. All right, with that, we're going to the next section. I really want to thank our panelists, and particularly, well, all of you, but also the Minister for taking time to be with here today and making such an honest case for the support that countries, particularly in the Global South, but your country specifically, need as well. And I'm just going to turn it over to Akanksha.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There is a reserve sign for each one of you, so I do hope you can now finally have the lunch that others have been having. Thank you so much. I encourage you to go and join the breakouts now. Thank you. A huge, huge applause. And thanks, Sanjayan, for kicking us off. So that was the fire starter while you were all having your starters. Now, we have about 30 minutes to go into breakout discussions. I'm just going to request for the next slide, please. So at each of the table, there is a very credible, intelligent, under pressure person who's supposed to be the discussion leader for your group. And each one of you have been given a thematic. So there are 3 different topics that we are looking at. And if you look at your slide, there should be a paper over there. These are the 3 big questions. Next 30 to 35 minutes, we would love for you to come up with any 1 or 2 sharp insights. And Simon is doing a really good job of also sharing it with his table. Just come up with a sharp insight that can then be taken over by the people who are working on this. And I say this on behalf of both the International Advisory Panel, the World Economic Forum, as well as Biodiversity Credits Alliance. The more ideas and insights that we have on pragmatically what we can do in the next, say, 2 years to get this market going, we welcome those ideas. So enjoy your main courses, come up with great ideas, and speak to you in 30 minutes now.
Hi everyone. Some of you, I'm Benjamin Leutner at the Land Bank Group. I'm responsible for anything related to energy. That is part of what we do, but actually our mission is to mobilize large volume funding for sustainable land use and for conservation. Our biggest product focus at the moment is on agricultural setting. But at the same time we also have conservation work streams, for example, our product with African parks, conservation, protection, products. And the magic sauce we are looking for is enable corporate investors, other investors, book costs differently. So if they invest into sustainable land use, we work with them so they can book this on the balance sheet as assets. Yeah, we work very hard on turning this narrative, nature, conservation, and then uplift from a cost. We see ourselves more as a platform. Even though I have an MRV team, we work very much with the lead of the providers.
and I'm also within Nature Positive Initiative, which has been working to develop the concept of nature positive for the last couple of years. And going forward, we're going to be looking at some metrics for measurability and guidelines around use of the term nature positive as well, around high intensity approaches to nature positive. And of course, within nature positive, there's an understanding of net positive to nature, how you would operationalize that, how we learn in the carbon space, and hopefully leapfrogging in the nature space. So super interesting work at the IADB, which we're also implementing today. Build on that, completely agree, and it's even harder on nature because at least in the on CO2 equivalent, start to go with metrics. We do not have that in nature. We have a number of different methods. One of the things we're hoping to do in this with 27 organizations is conservation groups come together to provide specific guidance on how to use things like this. But we want to work with the risk of space cancer and this is where we can solve this. We're still have all sorts of problems. Well, yeah, like enough guidance. It's not going to be good. In and all open, close, fungible. You're going to have to get enough, and for that you're going to
bunch of birds on the way. The cats. You know, we are a very garden. Better the measurement, comprehensive measurement, more assets you find, and frequently observing them regularly. Support the market, so we're really actively working with farmers. The thing we see is this sort of isolated problems that are in the first one is just where are the ecosystems? So we have this problem right now. Marco Lambertini and others are working on an ecosystem geo. I think you're right. Even so, one of the challenges is that we have to decide what spatial resolution, what constitutes taxonomy. That I think is going to become a solved problem. The second problem, which I think follows immediately after, is what we call condition adjustment, which is what is this? What's how degraded is this asset? Also essential. And then the third piece is then how do you measure decision? Yesterday we launched this ETA provider, where you're combining satellite imagery and opening up areas of observation. So I feel like part of the question around this issue, like there is a level of sensitivity we're likely to be next year, and what probably basic level, we can actually figure out how to measure biodiversity and natural capital in site-specific ways. And that feels like the thing we most need to use in order to support these my argument always gross margin on that is not 60%. Make it a fixed sum. If you impact on the natural capital and the creating of soil asset. And so the trouble I had in starting that up was what am I measuring, where am I measuring it, how do the impact, how does that translate back into a figure that I can invest in actions that will either make that product safer or make it use better in the market. And that was the complete piece of all of this. My advocacy is no measure what we're measuring is measuring how we're measuring before we get to credits. That's right. Yeah, I think that's the fundamental place that we are right now. We will race ahead. Racing ahead is the racing ahead of measurement. And it's not always measuring. I mean, we're actually working on biodiversity credits right now. All the way down to relevant areas and bringing all of these tools together. But we literally can't go one or two ways. So the generalizability of what we're doing, I think that's
like in order to talk about risk mitigation on the whole thing falling onto its feet here, communicating that whole thing, that is the communicating corporate side of things, we need quite another for the standard error. But then again, another step further into the financial sector, then everything is fine again. So we can deal with that. All of our other products as well, but you need to report it.
You're on the leading edge. What's your sense of the timescale that you can have developing methodology? You're away
Well,
from your
I think it's probably one of the things that a lot of this is about problem selection. How many pick large there are lots of pieces. And also move this look at here's a big question. We measure biodiversity.
Great out.
We also mentioned biodiversity. So we've been working with a team of ecologists on the rarity side. There's so much more. Everyone wants to high charismatic biodiversity. But places that are currently about 1% of homes in the world's most rare glass and air. So if you were going to think against we actually need to protect places of because it sort of depends on where you want to go in the next few years. And they probably deserve. So clearly, they looked at me and they looked at you and they were like, put the chocolates in front of me. I had a few. We rolled together. Yeah. Don't worry.
Hello? Hello there. So, thank you for the great discussions that you're having at your table. We'd love to close the session by getting, you must have come up with something good if there's clapping at this table. Pavan, you're on the table, so I know it's going to be fantastic. You have solved it, have you? Great. I'll come to you then. So I'd love to call on a few folks at tables to maybe take 2 minutes, maximum 2 minutes, to report out. And what I'd love to know is, spend 1 minute telling me, the theme or the feeling of discussion. It could be simply like, everyone at my table hated it and we couldn't agree on anything. That's fine. And then give me one thing for this year, 2024, that if we were to advance this market, what would we need to tackle or overcome? So one thing for this year that as a group we can think about, and then report on the feeling at your table. Ideally, you can do both of those in a minute. So I'm going to go to Mariana Sarmiento from Terrasos, maybe to start with.
No, I was.
Mariana, did you not know that we were going to go to you? I'm so sorry.
Not the first one.
I'm so sorry.
I'm assuming I'm just reporting back. Yep. All right. So, just a little bit of context. In our table, there were people very much involved in technology development, Ministry of Environment from Germany, recent graduates and people that are working biodiversity, and people that are working in nature finance, and myself that I'm on the ground developing projects in Colombia. So we had integration of science and local knowledge. So there was a lot of very interesting conversations. I'll just point out to what actions and policies are needed from a multilateral point of view. And I think there was general consensus that is, how can these multilaterals, if they need to deploy resources, how do they push for developing enabling conditions so that the IPLCs have the elements and the tools to participate in the market. So capacity building, making sure that safeguards for prior and informed consent are built in, and also developing different benefit sharing models, because there's not only one. I thought there was a really interesting conversation about local indigenous peoples and local communities. They're not just the stewards of nature, but they're also the knowledge holders. And also, as you have all these companies that are looking into the data and collecting data, who owns that data? And that's really tricky, because one of the barriers to access this market will be who has the information to be able to do the monitoring and do the metrics. So I thought that was really interesting. And how can innovative technology solutions for measuring biodiversity uplift? I think it goes back to that issue of the answer is going to be, in Spanish we call it a wisdom sharing. So this is going to require wisdom from scientists, traditional scientists, Western scientists, but also local scientists and local knowledge. And technology can help in creating those kinds of decision models that blend these two types of knowledges. Anything else? Okay. Tried my best.
Thank you, Mariana. That was great. Simon Zadek from Nature Finance. Yep. I mean, you guys did a clap in terms of the concordance of this table, so it's got to be fantastic.
This is an awesome group. I mean, they just absolutely slammed it. So firstly, whatever I say, it's just a small percentage of really the richness of the conversation here. So just 2 or 3 remarks. So our table was asked, how do you govern these markets? Yeah, kind of more or less. So I'm going to give you just a couple of pointers on things that emerged. It may seem obvious that these markets should exist to protect nature. Yeah, and that is absolutely true. That's the public utility side of it. But one actually has to unpack that a little bit. Are we trying to create markets targeted at specific species or aspects of biodiversity, not just any old thing? Are we really in the business of trying to mobilize money to invest in biodiversity? Or are we actually trying to focus on trying to incentivize businesses and financial institutions to shift their economic models so that nature is less destroyed by what they do? These may all seem cute set aside each other, but actually they may mean very different kinds of markets and ways in which they're governed. So we need to be clear really what the purpose is that we're getting at. Secondly, there are differentiated credits, differentiated markets, and differentiated contexts. So there will be offset markets, like it or not. There will be inset markets. There will be all kinds of different markets that emerge. Are we talking about a single governance approach, or are we talking about each type of market having to be governed in a different way, even if there are linkages between them? And similarly, we have at least 15, perhaps more, governments that are already developing national regulatory frameworks for biocredits. Surely there is a role, and I think Sylvie would agree, of convening these actors as you began to do at COP28, not necessarily all to reach the same decision, but at least to begin to connect the dots between ways in which different national regulatory frameworks are beginning to emerge. Not surprisingly, the issue of rights was really key. Rights around land. How do we connect together sovereign right to declare who does and doesn't own land with private market dynamics that want to differentiate between credits where land rights are being observed and credits where land rights are not being observed, perhaps but through sovereign action? What is the way in which we bring rights into this architecture in an effective way? But also, how do rights fit into the measurement of biodiversity? That underlying knowledge exchange between those who actually steward nature and the ultimate techie, geeky outfits that are going to offer some sort of certification model along the way. How does one bridge those two very different knowledge systems to ensure that the technification of validation doesn't actually diminish the voice of indigenous knowledge in the way in which those markets work? So that's a taster, hopefully useful. Anyone who wants to just check out more about governance should talk to this community over here. They're in really good shape. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Simon. Terrific. I'm going to go to Tim Coles with Replanet for 2-minute read back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We had the advantage of having a real government minister on our table, so we could make some real progress on this. We were particularly interested in how communities could benefit from carbon and biodiversity projects. And the first question we tackled was, who should the contract be with? Should it be with the communities? Should it be with the government? And the general decision was it's better, the lower the better. So whoever owns the land, effectively, if it's an indigenous group, then the contract should be with that, etc. Second, we looked at how are we ensuring that money actually gets to different communities? Because it's all very well saying you're paying money to communities, but that could go to one person or a few people. How do you make sure it's spread? And one of the requirements they came up with was to have a system for recording the benefits to families on a regular basis. So every 6 months or so, there's a listing of how much benefit each of those community members have had. And then we came to the point about how much money should actually go to each community. And here, the general agreement was that 60% was a fair assessment, 60% of the baseline budgets. But of course, every developer is developing credits at below market rates to resell. So if they resell and double the money, the communities have only got 30%. And so they were keen on having a clause in the sale contract so that 60% of the final value is actually paid into a sustainable business and livelihood fund. In other words, you were really maximizing benefits to communities. Then we were looking at how the MRV works. I mean, it's fantastic, MRV. But you've still got to get someone on the ground to go and put up your audio moths or to take photographs on your camera for botanical surveys, and involving the community as much as possible in doing that was regarded as a useful point. And then finally, regulation. Regulation has always got to be a balance between stopping the bad players, maintaining a sort of minimum level that every developer should have, and being over-regulated and stopping any investment coming in. And there's a general approval here that there should be a minimum set of standards, that there should be and that should be something like a 60% requirement on final value. It should be independent verification of financial claims. It should be ensuring that community members, not just the overall community, were getting an overall fair share, etc. Anyway, that's what they came up with. Can I just finish with one advert, please? 4 o'clock this afternoon, we have a session up in the Hotel Derby about biodiversity and carbon credits and how some projects are actually working in practice. So we'd love to see some of you there. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Tim.
Sorry, can I just add some from our table? Thank you very much for the beautiful report. We heard from the two other tables the necessity to validate the investment, and I think that there is a key point. This is scientific data that allows people to track the investment, and these credits are really taken to a point where we can really track it. And this is essential to count on scientific data, and this should be part of the whole equation.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to go to Anke Kavast with Yara. Anke from the center table.
Thank you very much. We had an incredible discussion, and we have a very high diversity on our table. And it's a real challenge to bring that to some key messages, to be honest. I mean, first of all, our task was to identify the business case for biodiversity credits. And a business case means that, first of all, we have to explain we need to sell the biodiversity credits. That's the first thing we have to start with. So what can you do with it? That needs to be outlined. For what purpose are you purchasing these biodiversity credits? And then you need a business case for it. And we discussed around the table what could be a potential use for the companies. And then the discussion got really hot. Because we have different segments here represented. We have different kind of purpose of the industry or perspectives, financial sector, pharmaceutical sector, and also other sectors represented. It was a bit about, if it comes to voluntary credits, then it's good to basically use them to get accounted for it in your corporate reporting and have a reputational gain, for example. You can also manage your own risk. If you do it inside your value chain, then you can manage basically your risk, which is related to nature loss, for example. You can also demonstrate in some segments that you have a higher return of investment. That's the strongest business case, because then the financial sector can be easily convinced, because they are after return of investments. That's their currency. But we have also a philanthropic side of it, and this should also not be fully neglected, because companies have also their strategy and they have also their purpose, and I think philanthropic activities are also included. And then the compliance element. We have today a lot of voluntary frameworks, but many of them might be compliance issues in future. So we need to understand, how do we be compliant in future, and what can we do now to build up basically the voluntary and the compliance strategy inside the companies. We have also discussed a lot about the local versus the global focus. And the question is, when it comes to small islands or small areas, regions, which are very much exposed to nature risk and also climate risk, how can we make sure that the the private sector has an interest to invest in these regions, even though they have no business there. I think we need strong value propositions for these kinds of financial injections where they are required, but where there is not so much presence of a global business, for example. So my conclusion is fantastic discussion. We need more of it. We need more ideation because there's much more in than we might think today. But it still needs some ideation and sandboxing. And this needs to be done in a kind of protected environment because there is a whole industry looking for greenwashing cases. And the private sector is in an experimentation phase. And we have to encourage the private sector to really try out things without being basically taking the risk of being an early adopter. And then the whole greenwashing industry is jumping on them and trying to find all the mistakes they made. So thanks a lot for this room, and I hope I have represented a bit what was discussed. Otherwise, I'm happy to share the mic with you. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anke. And then finally, let me turn to Ilona Szabo from the IGRAPA Institute.
Thank you so much. Hello, Simon. So this table is extremely knowledgeable on several aspects. So we had experts on the avant-garde of measurement. We have companies that are implementing carbon projects, and we have also investors in the field. So we try to see, answering to your question on what could we do first and very fast would be just agree on what high integrity is for all stakeholders. Make sure we're all at the same page and that we communicate with honesty to everybody where we are, what it means, and that so we avoid the risk of presuming that we're creating something new without a governance, without the minimum standards of acknowledgement of what are the expectations there. And we spoke about this because we all agree that the carbon cowboys, we should not replicate that model, so we have to avoid that deeply. So there's a lot on measurement as well. We've learned that before even getting to the measurement of biodiversity, there's this step now on the measuring, or try to define what is an ecosystem, and then the state of ecosystems, and then how do we go into biodiversity, and then choose some places and do well some models because they're very hard to generalize. And also choose between very rich biodiversity places, such as a tropical forest, or the places that are very rare species, are just the last species that you also need to protect. So don't overlook those places. And I think also there was an interesting focus here on the individuals, on educating the people that need to understand the biodiversity at the day-to-day level. So there's a fellow here talking about his experience on just connecting people to real-time information on invasive species, on, for example, cats versus birds in urban settings, and how people can actually realize what is their own action and what's their own responsibility vis-a-vis all that you're talking here. So I tried my best. If you want to add anything, please. No? Thank you so much.
That was terrific. Thank you. We obviously don't have time to go to every table, but Akanksha is very keen to keep this continue this conversation. So if I can please ask the table leads, take a photo of your notes if you want. If you are able to put it into a short email, I know we'd love to hear it and we'd love to incorporate it into the sessions going forward. Sylvia's going to close us here in a second here, but I'm going to use my moderator's privilege. A friend and colleague of mine, Matt Arnold, he used to be at JP Morgan, now sort of leads conservation finance at the Nature Conservancy. You don't know I was going to do this, of course, but I'd love if you could do 1 or 2 minutes and just give us your wisdom and your thoughts. Daunting task. I know you've been thinking about it for years.
Wow. Where I'm from, that's called a cold call. First of all, we were asked about what to do about IPLC communities, and transparency of benefit sharing was number 1. And number 2 is time. The deals progress at the pace of trust. So I just want to put that aside to honor my colleagues here. The Nature Conservancy is a full-throated supporter of the voluntary carbon market and regulated carbon markets. We're a full-throated supporter of regulated biodiversity schemes, wetlands, et cetera, because the government kind of provides oversight. We're super nervous about a voluntary biodiversity credit market. We love the idea we all heard at breakfast today, which is a super great experiment that we're going to find out about. Tradability is a big issue. Tim, I think, mentioned the notion that a trader could buy at $1 and sell at 10. And then the developer can still claim that they gave 80% of the benefits to whoever the community was. So, and then let's not even get into measurability. So, you know, I take my JP Morgan hat off and I put my Nature Conservancy hat on. Because of course, the thing that's really daunting to the Nature Conservancy right now is how many investor groups, trader groups, want to get into this market. They want to get exposure to, we want exposure to nature. What do you mean by exposure to nature? I don't know, we just want it. So there's a really important concern that we've got about that. Because of what you said, Sanjan, what's going to be here in 100 years? What's going to be more valuable? The intrinsic value of nature is only going, we think, in one direction. Even as it degrades, it gets more valuable. So this group here, with our governments and our voices, need to slow this down, actually, because there will be commercial capital finding its way into these spaces. And so that's concerning to us. And I just close with the global biodiversity framework, national targets. If your company's here, nest yourself into those. This is what we're beginning to feel, is that, okay, you large consumer products company, you investor, you want to get into these markets, put it in the context of a nation's existing commitment so that they can take credit for that. And whether you get a return on it or not, or want to make a claim about it, if it's nested into a national target, there's better cover for you and it's more public spirited. So thanks, Sanjan, for the cold call.
Now, I always knew you'd have something interesting to say. Thank you, Sylvie, please.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I'm not going to be long. First of all, thank you so much. I would like to thank you, Mr. Minister, for your words on, we don't want to be a buzzword. We don't want just to be one more thing and your people don't see money and don't see support. This is perfectly clear. Then that said, it's not easy, and all the questions, all the very good comments we heard. By the way, Elizabeth, I apologize because you are co-chair of TNFD and I did not mention you. My fault. Es ist mein Schuld, mein großer Schuld. So we have to, so I hear what was just said before. It's we should slow down. Who can? And who has the legitimacy to take decisions for the whole world? Who has the possibility to do it in a fair way that is not going to be criticized? So let's be very determined, but also very humble. We will do our best to deliver, Mr. Minister, to deliver. This is clear. To have the governments on board, to have the business on board, to allow the discussion, to have the local communities happy and able to continue their work, the work they have been doing for Earth for centuries. But once again, don't hesitate to contribute, to send our views, the reports you write, to begin with sandboxes experiments. It was said by David Vaillant and others. Try to disclose according to TNFD or the local rules you have to respect or whatever. And I hope we can meet again at Kanchka. And thank you so much for your extraordinary hospitality and the excellent chocolate. Thank you.